Anna Reynolds thought she had buried her past: the stolen company, the fiancé who betrayed her, the career that vanished overnight. But everything changed the night she greeted a billionaire's deaf mother using flawless ASL. Jonathan Pierce noticed her instantly, and so did the dangers she'd spent 2 years running from. Anna Reynolds never planned on ending up as a waitress at the Sterling House, one of New York City's most exclusive fine dining restaurants. Just a few years earlier, her life had looked entirely different, full of momentum, accomplishment, and a promising future in the high-stakes world of financial technology. She remembered the thrill of late nights coding breakthrough algorithms in a small but stylish office in Midtown, engrossed in work that she believed would one day revolutionize the trading industry. Back then, she was proud, confident, certain that her hard work would carve out the career she had always dreamed of. Yet now she wore a crisp black uniform and a polite smile, weaving between polished marble tables, refilling wine glasses for people who would never guess who she used to be. She had grown so accustomed to blending into the background that she sometimes wondered whether she had become a different person altogether, someone who existed only to move quietly through high-end dining rooms, unnoticed. The Sterling House was not the kind of place where people asked questions about the staff. Guests arrived dressed in tailored suits and couture dresses, more focused on their own conversations, business deals, and social connections than on the people serving them. It was perfect for Anna in that sense. No one expected anything from her except efficiency and courtesy, and she gave them exactly that. She took pride in performing her tasks well, yet she kept her head down, avoiding anything that might draw attention. She clocked in, carried out her responsibilities, and clocked out, convincing herself that stability was enough for now. The stories she heard from wealthy patrons sometimes reminded her of the world she used to inhabit, a world built on ambition, competition, and innovation. But that world had been torn away, and rebuilding herself meant starting from a place where she could control the narrative. Serving food and pouring wine was safer than being near boardrooms, data systems, and legal documents. In this job, no one could take anything else from her. Inside the restaurant, she had developed a reputation for her calm professionalism and her ability to handle even the most demanding customers. She greeted guests with a warm expression, answered questions about dishes and pairings, and moved at a pace that made her appear tireless. What her coworkers never saw was how carefully she monitored her surroundings. Every shift required emotional discipline, a constant attentiveness to ensure nothing triggered memories she preferred to bury. Still, there were moments when she caught glimpses of who she once was, especially when customers discussed finance, market trends, or new technologies. Hearing those topics felt like a whisper from her past, reminding her of the work she had loved and the future she had built before it was taken away. The job didn't pay enough for the degree she held, but it paid enough for rent in a modest apartment in Queens and groceries that stretched across a week. Anna rarely spoke about her background, never mentioning Columbia University or the fact that she once developed proprietary trading models powerful enough to attract industry giants. There were too many risks attached to those facts, risks tied to the man who had dismantled everything she had created. Her coworkers thought she was simply private, maybe shy, maybe recovering from some vague heartbreak. They weren't entirely wrong, but they didn't know the scale of what she had lost or the extent of the betrayal that forced her to disappear. Even so, she found a strange sense of peace within the routine of her shifts. The Sterling House had its own rhythm, the clinking of silverware, the soft hum of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter from a table celebrating something expensive. Anna let that rhythm carry her through each evening. It was easier not to think about her old life when she stayed busy navigating crowds of affluent diners. She avoided tables where conversations veered too close to financial analysis or algorithmic trading, though sometimes those topics floated through the air anyway, reminding her of late-night strategy sessions and whiteboards filled with equations. Still, she maintained her composure, keeping a polite smile in place even when her chest tightened. Her manager trusted her with high-profile clients, which meant Anna sometimes served people whose names she recognized from business journals or tech conferences she used to attend. Each recognition felt like a tiny jolt, an echo of the person she once had the potential to become. She wondered what these people would think if they recognized her, if they realized she was the same Anna Reynolds whose name had once appeared beside groundbreaking financial models before it abruptly vanished from the industry conversation. But she made sure they never had a reason to look at her closely enough to make that connection. People tended to look past service workers, and Anna relied on that more than she cared to admit. Despite everything, there was still a spark inside her, a part of her that refused to die. On nights when she returned home exhausted, she sometimes found herself sketching out ideas for new algorithms on scrap paper or old notebooks. She didn't code anymore, not the way she used to, but her mind still moved through problem-solving patterns automatically, almost involuntarily. Maybe one day she would find her way back to the work she loved. Maybe one day she would reclaim the parts of herself she had been forced to abandon. But that day felt far away. For now she focused on survival. All of this explained why the Sterling house became her refuge. It was a place where she could disappear into predictable routines. A place where no one cared who she had been before she put on the uniform. That illusion of safety lasted until the evening she noticed the reservation under the name Pierce, a name associated with one of the most powerful business families in America. Anna didn't think much of it at first. Wealthy people dined there every night. But as she prepared the table and adjusted the place settings, she felt a sudden uneasiness she couldn't explain. She brushed it aside, attributing it to the long day she'd had. She didn't yet know that this single reservation would drag her past into the present with alarming speed. When the Pierce party arrived, she greeted them with her usual professional warmth. She didn't expect anything unusual from the table beyond the typical level of expectation that came with billionaire clients. The man at the head of the group, tall, sharp-eyed, impeccably dressed, carried himself with the kind of confidence she recognized instantly. Someone used to making billion-dollar decisions. Someone who commanded attention without asking for it. She didn't know his name yet, but she could tell he was the kind of person who rarely heard the word no. What she didn't expect was the older woman beside him, nor the way that single interaction with her would begin unraveling the guarded life Anna had worked so hard to construct. Jonathan Pierce was the kind of man people noticed the moment he entered any room, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence naturally shifted the atmosphere. He carried himself with uncheckable control, the type honed through years of negotiating billion-dollar deals, managing boardrooms filled with competing egos, and being raised with expectations that would have crushed anyone less disciplined. When he walked into the Sterling house that evening with his mother, Eleanor Pierce, the staff straightened instinctively, conversations among diners softened, and even the matred's polished composure lifted a notch. Jonathan was well known in the business world not as a flashy tech bro or a celebrity CEO, but as a calculating strategist whose ability to rebuild failing corporations had earned him a reputation as one of the most influential young moguls in the country. But none of that was what caught Anna's attention. It was his mother. Eleanor Pierce, elegantly dressed in a navy cashmere shawl and pearl earrings, had a warmth about her that contrasted sharply with her son's controlled demeanor. She walked with confidence, her posture straight, her eyes bright and attentive as they scanned the restaurant. Years of communicating through hand movements had made her exceptionally observant, and Anna noticed immediately that Eleanor took in every detail from the placement of the wine glasses to the subtle gestures between staff and patrons. Anna recognized that kind of awareness. It came from living in a world where communication relied not on spoken words but on expressions, movement, and connection. The moment Anna saw her signing gently toward her son, something tugged at her memory, an instinct from the part of her life she rarely touched anymore. Jonathan led Eleanor to their table with a protective steadiness that suggested this was more than a routine dinner. Rich families often brought loved ones to the Sterling house, but there was something unusually genuine about the way Jonathan guided his mother's hand to the back of the chair, ensuring she sat comfortably before taking his own seat. He didn't rush. He didn't treat her like an accessory for public display. He treated her like the center of his world. Anna wasn't used to seeing that in her line of work, especially not from men with his level of power. As Anna approached with menace, she could feel the familiar tension building in her shoulders. Wealthy diners often carried an air of entitlement, expecting perfection without ever looking at the human beings behind the service. Jonathan did look at her, though but not in the predatory or dismissive way she'd grown used to from certain male executives. His gaze was sharp, assessing, like he was trying to place her or understand something about her beyond the uniform. She quickly lowered her eyes, offering the menace and reciting the evening specials with practiced ease. His responses were polite, concise, and measured in a way that made her suspect he wasn't the type to waste words. Eleanor, on the other hand, captured Anna's full attention when she began signing again, her hands moving with grace and expression born from years of fluency. She tried to get Jonathan's attention, tapping lightly on the edge of the table, but he was busy adjusting his cufflinks and checking a notification on his phone. Anna realized Eleanor wanted something, but no one else seemed to notice. The other staff members glanced at her with confusion, clearly unsure how to respond. They were used to wealthy patrons making verbal complaints, not visual ones, and their hesitation left Eleanor waiting longer than she should have. Without hesitation, Anna stepped forward, placing the wine bottle on the nearest server stand. Her hands moved before she even fully thought it through. She signed confidently, "Good evening, how can I assist you?" The relief on Eleanor's face was immediate, blooming into a delighted smile that softened her entire expression. Eleanor responded with animated signing, thanking Anna for acknowledging her and expressing excitement at finally being able to communicate easily with someone outside her family. She complimented the ambience, asked about the chef's recommendations, and even joked about how Jonathan always pretended he understood more Assel than he actually did. Jonathan's head snapped up at the motion of hands, his expression shifting from distraction to astonishment. He watched as Anna conversed fluently with his mother, his gray eyes narrowing with interest rather than irritation. He had probably never seen one of the restaurant staff communicate with Eleanor in her language before. In his world, people tended to treat disability like an inconvenience, something to be pushed aside, accommodated at the bare minimum, or handled by specialists. But Anna wasn't performing a service. She was engaging Eleanor with genuine warmth, focusing entirely on her rather than on the customers surrounding them. That alone made Jonathan study her with newfound curiosity. The entire restaurant seemed to notice. Conversations dimmed as subtly leaned in, intrigued by the unexpected interaction. Some looked impressed, others confused, but Anna pushed all of that out of her mind as she continued speaking with her hands. Eleanor asked questions about the menu, complimented the salmon, and told Anna it reminded her of a dish she once had during a trip to Seattle. Anna explained the chef's preparation methods, mentioning herbs and techniques with a familiarity that suggested she actually cared about the food she was serving. Jonathan interrupted only when Eleanor playfully teased him in Assel, signing something that made Anna laugh despite her efforts to stay professional. Jonathan raised a brow, clearly suspicious. "What did she say?" he asked, his voice edging into something almost amused. Anna hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "She said you work very hard." Eleanor quickly signed an additional phrase that Anna politely left out. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "That's not all she said." His tone carried the dry humor of a man accustomed to catching inconsistencies. "My mother doesn't sign anything without adding something she finds amusing." "What did I miss?" Anna offered a diplomatic smile but didn't elaborate, and Eleanor's mischievous grin confirmed Jonathan's suspicion. For just a moment, Anna felt something shift. It wasn't attraction, at least not in the romantic sense, it was recognition. She understood people who observed closely, who questioned small details, who noticed when something didn't align. That used to be her. But she pushed that thought away. This interaction needed to remain purely professional. She collected the wine bottle again, smoothed down her apron, and prepared to step back into the role she had chosen for herself. But Jonathan's next words stopped her. "Where did you learn to sign like that?" he asked, and this time his tone wasn't demanding or condescending. It held genuine curiosity, sharper than before, and that curiosity was dangerous. Anna could sense it immediately. She had spent years building a life no one would question, a persona that allowed her to blend in and avoid scrutiny. But with just one moment of kindness toward his mother, she had stepped outside the boundaries of that persona. Jonathan Pierce now saw her, not just the uniform, not just the waitress, but something more. Something she wasn't ready to explain. And in that moment, Anna realized her carefully controlled world had begun to crack. Jonathan Pierce had always been good at reading people. Years of negotiating mergers, uncovering hidden agendas, and dealing with executives who masked their true intentions behind polished smiles had sharpened his instincts to a razor's edge. That was why, when he watched Anna interact with his mother, he immediately knew she was not the ordinary restaurant employee she appeared to be. Most servers were polite, efficient, and attentive. But Anna moved with a level of precision that didn't belong to someone who had simply learned on the job. There was intention behind the way she responded to questions, a structured eloquence in her language, and a quiet confidence in her house skills that spoke of serious education, not casual hobby-level familiarity. Jonathan noticed everything: the way she carried herself, the way she listened as though she understood more than she let on, the subtle intelligence in her eyes whenever she explained something thoughtfully. He had seen countless resumes in his life, and even without one, he could tell Anna Reynolds wasn't where she belonged. Her current role didn't match her natural aptitude. She was sharper, more observant, more knowledgeable than most analysts he interviewed at Pierce Holdings. Something about her simply didn't add up. As she stepped back from the table, Jonathan continued watching her, studying the way she moved through the dining room. She navigated crowded aisles with graceful awareness, adjusting her pace instinctively around guests and servers without colliding or hesitating. That kind of instinct came from someone used to adapting quickly under pressure, someone who had learned to read the environment like a living map. She was disciplined but not rigid, approachable but not overly friendly, and carried herself with a self-control that didn't match the job. And she didn't try to impress anyone. That alone made Jonathan curious. People who worked at the Sterling house often tried too hard around him, bringing out their best smiles, speaking with affected politeness, hoping he would remember them or tip generously. But Anna didn't do any of that. She acted as though he was just another customer and as if recognition meant nothing to her. That was unusual. People always noticed his last name. Anna, meanwhile, could feel the weight of Jonathan's attention long after she stepped away. She had expected his surprise at her ability to communicate with his mother, but she hadn't expected the keen, analytical look he gave her afterward, the look of a man who had begun forming questions. Questions were dangerous. Questions led to curiosity, and curiosity led to investigations. Investigations were the last thing Anna wanted. She had built her entire life around avoiding exactly that. The safest strategy was always the same: keep conversations short, stay polite, avoid anything that could reveal unnecessary details. She'd followed those rules for 2 years, and they had kept her safe until now. She only meant to help a woman who deserved the courtesy of being understood. She hadn't meant to draw attention to herself. She hadn't meant to reveal anything. But Jonathan's mother had been so genuinely appreciative, so warm and excited to engage in real conversation, that Anna had momentarily forgotten the walls she always kept around herself. As Anna served other tables, she kept her head down though her mind was racing. She replayed the moment she responded to Eleanor in Assel, the moment Jonathan's gaze sharpened, the moment she realized she had already said too much. She knew this wasn't just idle curiosity. Jonathan wasn't a man who asked questions casually. He was a man who followed threads until he reached answers. She had worked with people like him before, leaders who could dissect a situation with a single glance, who had the power to pull apart someone's entire life with a phone call. Daniel Chu had been one of them. Thinking of him made her chest tighten. She couldn't afford to repeat that mistake. She needed to stay far below the radar, but Jonathan wasn't letting it go. When she returned to refill Eleanor's water, Jonathan leaned slightly forward, studying her with an intensity that made her heart accelerate. "You handled that well," he said, nodding toward his mother. "Most people don't know what to do when she's trying to communicate." He wasn't complimenting her, he was probing her. She could hear it in his tone, feel it in his gaze. "I used to study languages," Anna replied, keeping her expression professional. "Sign language came naturally to me." It was vague enough to be harmless, or so she hoped. But Jonathan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully at her choice of words. "Most people who take a class or two don't sign that fluently," he said. "Your technique is sophisticated." She froze for a fraction of a second before responding, "Some things just stick with you." Jonathan didn't believe her. She could tell he didn't say it outright, but the slight lift of his eyebrow revealed everything. He wasn't the type to accept half answers. He was the type to dig deeper, to connect dots, to find patterns others missed. She had walked straight into his line of sight by speaking a language most servers didn't know, and she had done it flawlessly. Eleanor, oblivious to the rising tension, signed happily about the salmon and her trip to Seattle years ago. Jonathan watched the exchange closely, his expression softening whenever his mother signed but sharpening again each time Anna responded. Anna felt like she was balancing on a tightrope. One misstep, and everything she had worked to hide would unravel. She moved to step away again, but Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Where did you study?" She knew he didn't mean Assel. He meant everything: her posture, her articulation, her knowledge. The way she carried herself, like someone who had once walked through boardrooms rather than dining rooms. Anna's mind scrambled for an answer that wouldn't open more doors. "Here and there," she said with a polite shrug. "Different courses, different places." Jonathan didn't push further, not out of politeness, but because he knew pressuring her now would make her retreat. He wasn't done, though. She saw the spark of determination in his eyes, the recognition that he had stumbled upon a puzzle, and he was a man who loved puzzles. Anna excused herself the moment she could, rushing through the staff corridor to regain her composure. She leaned briefly against the stainless steel counter, taking a steadying breath. She had worked too hard to disappear, too hard to stay unknown, too hard to keep her past buried. And now she had attracted the attention of someone powerful enough to unravel everything within days, if not hours. But she couldn't avoid serving Jonathan's table. The Sterling house assigned sections strictly, and hers wasn't going to change halfway through the night. She would have to face him again. She would have to pretend nothing was wrong. Jonathan, meanwhile, had shifted his attention back to his mother, but his mind kept drifting toward Anna. Something about her didn't align with her job. Something about her didn't match the life she was presenting. He wasn't suspicious in a hostile way, only intrigued. But for Anna Reynolds, even innocent curiosity was a threat. Because curiosity was the first step toward discovery. And discovery was the one thing she could not allow. Anna returned to her station with her pulse thudding a little faster than normal. She tried to focus on the wine list she needed to update and the table numbers she still had to check. But her mind kept circling back to Jonathan's questions. She had been careful for so long, careful to never reveal too much, careful to appear ordinary, careful to avoid anything that might trigger recognition. She had spent 2 years shaping a life that left no room for curiosity. Tonight, in a single moment of compassion, she had jeopardized that careful construction. It wasn't Jonathan himself that worried her. He seemed rational, respectful, even kind. But men like him didn't operate alone. They had assistants, research teams, lawyers, analysts. If he became curious enough, he could make a single phone call, and her entire past would crawl out of the shadows she had forced it into. The risk terrified her. She refunded her thoughts on the tasks at hand, but she could feel the edges of her old life pressing against her again. The memories she avoided, boardrooms, financial models, the hum of fast-moving markets, the future she built with her bare hands came rushing back, uninvited and sharp. She blinked hard, forcing herself to breathe. She couldn't afford to fall apart in the middle of a shift. That was the rule she had lived by since the night everything collapsed: stay grounded, stay small, stay unseen. But Jonathan's gaze had already chipped away at that safety, and the worst part was how effortlessly it happened. She carried a tray to a table near the back, her steps steady despite the storm inside her chest. As she set down a dish of filet mignon, she heard a pair of businessmen discussing the markets, something about a recent spike in algorithmic trading interest. The mention of algorithmic systems made her stomach twist. Her hands tightened reflexively around the tray. Even after 2 years, the very topic scraped at her nerves, because it belonged to the life she had lost. She had once been at the center of conversations like that, contributing ideas, designing architecture, building models that could predict risk with uncanny accuracy. Now she was listening to strangers misinterpret theories she had helped pioneer. It was a quiet kind of cruelty, hearing echoes of your own brilliance but not being able to claim it. She excused herself from the table and stepped into the service hallway, letting her shoulders drop just slightly. Her breathing came out uneven. She wasn't fragile. She had survived far worse than a curious billionaire, but she had also spent 2 years trying to outrun the collapse of her old life. She remembered how quickly everything had fallen apart: the first accusation she didn't understand, the mounting pressure, the sudden shift in how people looked at her, the moment Daniel turned on her without warning. It had all happened in a rapid, brutal sequence that left her with nothing but the clothes she packed in a single rushed night and the credentials she hid like contraband. It wasn't the job that humiliated her. She never saw any work as beneath her. But she couldn't deny that the transition from tech founder to restaurant server had felt like falling through a trapdoor. She had gone from being someone whose opinions shaped investment movements to someone who refilled water glasses. And she adapted because adaptation was the only path forward. She forced herself to accept that anonymity might not be glamorous, but it was safe. Safe was all she had left. A coworker brushed past her, pulling her out of her thoughts. Table 12 needs refills, the server said, not knowing the weight of that simple directive. Table 12, the Pierces. Anna inhaled slowly. She couldn't avoid them forever. Standing still would only draw more attention. So she squared her shoulders, pressed away the lingering tremor in her hands, and moved back into the dining room. As she approached, Eleanor smiled brightly, lifting one hand in greeting. Anna smiled back genuinely because, despite everything, she liked Eleanor. She admired her warmth, her sincerity, the kindness etched into her expressions. Eleanor didn't see Anna as a server. She saw her as a person. But Jonathan was watching again, and this time there was a different quality in his gaze, something sharper, deeper, almost evaluative. He wasn't trying to intimidate her, but he was clearly considering what he had observed and trying to piece together the parts that didn't fit. When Anna refilled his glass, he spoke in a low, measured voice. "You said you studied languages," he said. "What else did you study?" She felt the question like a hook catching fabric, not harsh, not accusatory, but purposeful. He was trying to understand her. She couldn't blame him for that. She just wished he didn't care enough to ask. "A bit of everything," she answered lightly. Life doesn't always go as planned. It was a vague truth, but unfortunately it was too honest. Jonathan's eyes flickered with recognition. He heard the heaviness beneath the simple sentence, and that only made him more intrigued. Alina tapped the table to get Anna's attention again and signed something about wanting to compliment the chef for the salmon. Anna nodded and translated, careful to keep the interaction focused on the task. But even as she turned to walk away, she felt Jonathan's gaze following her, not with predatory interest but with concern, curiosity, and something else she couldn't name. It made her feel exposed. She retreated to the back again, fighting the urge to panic. She needed to ground herself. She needed to remind herself of why she kept her past buried. She had witnessed firsthand how quickly trust could turn into a weapon. She had trusted Daniel. She had believed in their shared vision, their shared dreams, their shared future. And he had destroyed her without hesitation when it benefited him. That betrayal had carved a permanent wound inside her. It taught her a lesson she could never forget. The moment people know your value, they can take it away. The moment they know your weakness, they can use it. The moment they understand your past, they can rewrite it. So she disappeared, reinvented herself, rebuilt her world from the ashes. She owed her survival to the fact that no one looked at her long enough to ask questions. Jonathan Pierce looking at her was dangerous. Not because he intended harm, but because he saw too much. As the night progressed, Anna found herself glancing toward table 12 more often than she meant to. She didn't want to, but something about the Pierces drew her attention. Maybe it was the kindness in Alina's expressions. Maybe it was the way Jonathan softened whenever he looked at his mother. Maybe it was the gentle understanding she saw in Alina's eyes, almost as if the older woman sensed that Anna was carrying more than she let herself show. Whatever it was, it made Anna feel something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time: connection. And connection was dangerous too. Her shift neared its end, but the unease stayed with her. She knew Jonathan wouldn't forget her. She could feel it in every question he asked, every thoughtful look he gave her. She didn't know what he planned to do with that curiosity, but she knew one thing for certain: she had stepped into view. And stepping into view was the first step toward being found. Long before Anna Reynolds became a waitress in New York, she lived a completely different life, one built on ambition, talent, and the belief that she was building something meaningful alongside someone she trusted. Back then, her name wasn't just another line on a name tag, it held weight. It appeared in publications, on research papers, in financial circles where innovation mattered. She remembered the first time she walked into the office she shared with Daniel Chu. How proud she felt seeing her algorithms running on massive screens. How thrilling it was to watch projections shift based on models she wrote herself. Vertex Capital Analytics had started as a dream between the two of them, merging her technical brilliance with his smooth navigation of the corporate world. In the beginning, they were a perfect team, or so she believed. Daniel had always known how to charm a room. He could talk investors into believing in a vision they didn't fully understand, convince clients that risks were opportunities, and make people trust him with nothing more than a confident smile. Anna used to admire that about him. She admired how he handled pressure effortlessly, how he carried himself with certainty even when things were uncertain behind the scenes. She never imagined that the same confidence she admired would one day be used as a weapon against her. She never imagined that the man who kissed her in the doorway of their shared office would later file documents painting her as a criminal. The memory of it still struck her, sometimes sharp, sudden, disorienting. One day she was the rising star of a company she helped create, and the next she was being escorted out of her own building by security officers who wouldn't even look her in the eye. The first accusation had blindsided her, a claim that her algorithms weren't hers, that she'd stolen proprietary concepts, that she fabricated testing data. She thought it had to be a misunderstanding. Daniel had always said the company was built on trust, transparency, and partnership. Why would anyone accuse her of something so ridiculous? Then she discovered who filed the complaint. She could still recall the way her knees buckled when she saw his name on the report, her funk, her business partner. The man who used to bring her coffee during all-nighters and tell her she was brilliant. The betrayal had hit deeper than any professional sabotage. It was personal in the cruelest way possible. He hadn't just undermined her career. He'd destroyed the foundation of her life. And he did it without hesitation. At first she confronted him, trembling, desperate for an explanation. She remembered standing in their loft, asking him how he could do something so devastating. He responded with the same composed expression he used in boardrooms. He told her she was overreacting. He claimed she was confused. He said the accusations were necessary to protect the company. The moment she realized he wasn't denying anything was the moment her world cracked open. Daniel didn't intend to correct a misunderstanding. He intended to rewrite history, removing her from the company entirely, taking full credit for the intellectual property she created, and positioning himself as the sole visionary behind the company's success. His strategy was worse than betrayal. It was calculated erasure. He filed charges that he later dropped at the last minute, knowing the damage would be permanent. He claimed he didn't want to ruin her life, even as he ensured she wouldn't find another job in the field. He rewrote contracts, edited patent paperwork, and replaced her name with his. In a matter of weeks, Anna went from being a respected innovator to being considered a disgraced former employee. Overnight, she became a rumor whispered about in industry circles, the subject of cautionary tales she didn't deserve. Daniel didn't just want her out. He wanted her forgotten. It worked. She moved out of their shared home, abandoning everything except the documents she could salvage. She fled the industry and hid the last remnants of her old life in a lockbox under her mattress. She took a job far outside the world she once dominated. A job where no one would ever think to connect her to the scandal that destroyed her. She changed the way she dressed, the way she introduced herself, the way she answered questions. She removed traces of the person she once was because survival demanded it. Every day since then she lived with the fear that someone would discover her identity, dig into the past, and reopen wounds she fought so hard to close. So when Jonathan's curiosity lingered on her, it terrified her more than she wanted to admit. She had seen that spark before the moment someone realized she wasn't just another worker. But Jonathan wasn't just someone. He was powerful, connected, respected. He had the resources to uncover everything she had tried to bury. And if he uncovered it, Daniel would too. The thought made her hands tremble. She had worked so hard to build a life where no one questioned her. And now, because she used a skill she hadn't touched in years, her past was threatening to surface. She cursed herself silently for forgetting the rules she built her life around. But even as she panicked, she couldn't regret helping Eleanor. The older woman's genuine joy at being understood had been worth it. Anna just wished that moment hadn't come with consequences. As she wiped down a polished silver tray, her coworkers chatted nearby, unaware of the storm moving through her mind. They laughed about tips, joked about customers, made plans for after their shift. Meanwhile, Anna could feel her old life breathing down her neck, closer than it had been in years. She reminded herself of the promise she made the night she left I'll never let anyone get close enough to hurt her again. The only way to stay safe was to stay detached, unnoticed, and uninteresting. But Jonathan Pierce had already seen too much. And Anna knew from experience that once a man with power became interested in something or someone, he didn't let it go easily. She wasn't afraid of Jonathan himself. What she feared was the world he came from, the world she escaped. A world filled with people like Daniel Chu. Because if Jonathan started digging, he would eventually uncover the truth. And if Daniel found out she was still in New York, she didn't know if she'd survive the fallout a second time. Jonathan didn't usually spend much time thinking about the staff at restaurants he visited. But something about Anna kept circling back through his mind long after he returned to his office. It wasn't just her fluency in ASL or the way she carried herself with more composure than most executives he worked with. It was the unmistakable impression that she was holding back a history, one that didn't fit the polished uniform and modest role she occupied at the Sterling house. He didn't know why it bothered him, but he couldn't shake the thought that she belonged somewhere very different. The next morning, he sat in his Manhattan office reviewing paperwork for the upcoming merger with Vertex Capital Analytics. The deal was massive, one of the largest Pierce Holdings had pursued in recent years. Vertex's trading algorithms had caught Wall Street's attention for their accuracy and adaptability, and Jonathan was prepared to integrate those models into a new division that would transform his company's technological footing. As he sifted through documents, he paused at the list of intellectual property Vertex claimed exclusive rights to. He had seen these reports before, but today something about them caught him off guard. The models were impressive, too impressive in fact. Their sophistication, depth, and structure suggested the work of someone with a sharper engineering mind than Daniel Chu, the CEO of Vertex. Jonathan had met Daniel several times, and while Daniel was charming and persuasive, he lacked the technical intensity displayed in these documents. The algorithms felt different, refined, personal. Created by someone who thought in layers and patterns, someone who understood financial risk the way a musician understood rhythm. Jonathan couldn't articulate why, but he felt the models didn't match the personality of the man claiming them. He leaned back in his chair, tapping the edge of the folder. Something was missing from the story Daniel had told him. Something didn't line up. As he reviewed the timeline of development, the inconsistency grew. The patents were filed in a concentrated burst, all within 6 months. The prototypes were allegedly created in-house by Vertex research team, yet the documentation referenced systems and testing environments that didn't match the company's infrastructure at the time. Jonathan frowned as he read the names attached to the early drafts. None of them aligned with the stylized coding language in the samples. It was as if the company wanted him to believe these innovations had one origin, when in reality, the origin felt entirely different. It reminded him strangely of the way Anna spoke, clear, precise, intentional. That same precision existed in the code, as if the creator cared deeply about every line. He shook the thought away. The two had nothing to do with each other. Anna was a waitress. A talented, intriguing one, but a waitress nonetheless. Yet the lingering feeling that she was something more continued tugging at him. He had learned to trust his instincts in business. And his instincts were telling him that Anna Reynolds didn't end up at the Sterling house by accident. People like her didn't tend to disappear without reason. While Jonathan reviewed the merger documents, Anna was sitting on the edge of her bed in her small Queens apartment, staring at an article she had accidentally found during a quick online search. The headline hit her like a blow. Pierce Holdings announces strategic merger talks with Vertex Capital Analytics. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around her phone. Her world, once torn apart by Daniel, was now circling back to her in the most impossible way. She scrolled through the article, her chest tightening with each sentence. Pictures of Jonathan and Daniel shaking hands flashed across the screen. The article praised the merger as visionary, an alliance that would reshape automated trading. The press called Daniel a pioneer, crediting him for the innovation she had built from scratch. It was surreal watching the future she once envisioned now unfolding without her, twisted into something unrecognizable. Panic climbed up her throat. She had survived the first collapse of her life only by disappearing. If Jonathan merged with Daniel, if their companies united, and if Jonathan examined the intellectual property deeply enough, he might discover the truth. Worse, Daniel might discover that Jonathan had discovered it. If Daniel learned she was still in New York, still breathing, still capable of reclaiming her work, he would not sit quietly. He wasn't the type to risk losing control. She had seen what he was willing to do when he felt threatened. Her heart hammered as she paced the room. She tried to convince herself that Jonathan wouldn't look into her past. But the memory of his watchful eyes at the restaurant told her otherwise. He noticed things, he studied details. He asked questions without asking them directly. He was the kind of man who got answers. And she was the kind of woman who couldn't afford to give him any. That evening at the Sterling house, Anna hoped the Pierce reservation wouldn't reappear, but luck wasn't on her side. Jonathan returned for dinner without his mother this time. He sat at a table alone, reviewing documents on his tablet as though the restaurant had become an extension of his office. When Anna approached to take his order, he looked up and offered her a polite smile, but she could sense something different in his demeanor. He wasn't simply looking at her, he was analyzing her. "I hope your shift is going well," he said, his tone calm. Then almost casually, "You mentioned studying languages. Did you pursue anything else academically?" The question wasn't casual at all. Anna knew it immediately, her pulse jumped. She forced a measured smile. "A few things," she answered. "Most of it doesn't matter now." But Jonathan didn't drop it. "Your signing is exceptional," he said. "And your explanations last night, you spoke like someone who understands systems deeply. Not just food preparation." Anna felt heat rise in her cheeks. She couldn't let him continue down that road. "I've had a variety of experiences," she said quickly, redirecting the conversation. "Life can take unexpected turns." Jonathan nodded thoughtfully, but he remained quiet for a moment longer than necessary, as if considering his next move. It made her uneasy. She hurried away from the table, pretending to check another order, though her mind spun with fear. He wasn't going to let this go. And that meant everything she tried to bury was on the verge of being uncovered. Back at his table, Jonathan watched her retreat with a contemplative expression. He didn't know who Anna Reynolds really was. But he knew one thing with certainty: she was hiding something. And that something was important. He had a feeling he was standing at the edge of a much larger story. And Anna, whether she liked it or not, was part of it. Jonathan Pierce had always trusted his instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling him something was deeply off about Vertex Capital Analytics. The more he studied their documentation, the more inconsistencies he found, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. A system this advanced didn't come from a team that lacked the technical depth to back it up. He had met Daniel Chu's research staff. They were competent, sure, but none of them had the signature precision embedded in the models. Real innovation carried a voice, a rhythm, a fingerprint. Jonathan had reviewed enough codebases in his career to recognize when something had a unique author behind it, and whoever wrote Vertex's core algorithms had a distinct, remarkably disciplined style. It didn't feel corporate, felt personal, crafted, visionary. One evening in his office, surrounded by screens reflecting cascading datasets, Jonathan leaned back in his chair, arms folded as he stared at the lines of code he'd been dissecting for hours. Who wrote this? He murmured to himself, his mind drifted unexpectedly to Anna. He didn't know why, but the more he thought about the elusive author behind the algorithms, the more he remembered her posture. The way she explained things with an ease that suggested high-level reasoning, the calm professionalism that didn't match her job title. The thought unsettled him. What were the odds that a waitress at a Manhattan restaurant and the creator of a groundbreaking trading model were the same person? Ridiculous. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had stumbled onto something bigger than he first believed. He closed the file and pulled up Vertex's patent records, reading through the names attached. He recognized none of them. But then again, Daniel had been evasive about his team during their last meeting, almost overly polished in his explanations. Jonathan was used to CEOs exaggerating their contributions, but Daniel's confidence came across as rehearsed, too clean, too flawless. Men who were telling the truth didn't usually sound that perfect. Jonathan flagged several files for review and forwarded them to his legal department. Run a deep analysis, he wrote, all metadata, all revisions, all dates. Meanwhile, Anna tried to keep her head down at the Sterling house, but ever since Jonathan's last visit, she felt like a thread pulled too tightly, one wrong tug and everything would unravel. She had hoped Jonathan would forget about her once he left the restaurant, but he returned 2 nights later, then again the night after that. He never said much, he never pushed, but each time his questions edged closer to the truth. He wasn't interrogating her exactly. He was observing. She could feel it every time he glanced at her with that analytical look, studying her like a puzzle he intended to solve. And worse, she could feel something else, a growing interest that wasn't purely professional. On her break, Anna sat in the tiny staff lounge scrolling through the news on her phone, hoping to distract herself. But instead, she found another headline about the merger. Daniel Chu was pictured once again, presenting himself as the genius architect behind Vertex's innovations. Seeing his face in photo after photo made her stomach twist. It was like the world had rewritten her story and handed her lines to a character she never agreed to be. She shut off her phone before the nausea could get worse. She couldn't let this consume her. She needed distance. She needed to stay hidden. But distance wasn't something the universe seemed ready to give her. 3 days later, Jonathan's legal team sent him a report containing preliminary findings. As he read through the document, his expression sharpened with every line. Original drafts stored under unknown user profile, timestamps, inconsistent external device signatures present, patent filings altered within days of submission. Then he reached the most damning section. Name of Reynolds appears in early metadata references, though removed in final drafts. Jonathan froze. Reynolds. His heartbeat quickened not from excitement, but from recognition. He whispered the name aloud, and the memory of the confident, graceful young woman who spoke to his mother flooded back. Could it be possible? Could the waitress at the Sterling house be the missing architect behind Vertex's innovations? The idea shouldn't have made sense, but the evidence pointed in a direction too deliberate to ignore. He picked up his phone and called his lead attorney. I want everything, he said, all original documents, all access logs. Anything with the name Reynolds on it, no delays. After hanging up, he sat back in his chair, running a hand across his jaw as he processed the implications. If Anna Reynolds was the true creator of Vertex's algorithms, that meant Daniel had built an empire on stolen work. Worse, if Anna disappeared 2 years ago, it meant someone had forced her out. Jonathan thought of her quiet composure, the way she avoided attention, the flicker of fear he saw when he asked about her background. Suddenly, her guardedness made perfect sense. She wasn't hiding out of preference, she was hiding out of necessity. That night, Jonathan drove to the Sterling house, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he intended to say to her or whether she would even speak to him, but he had to try. When he walked inside, the hostess led him to his usual table, and Anna approached a moment later, wearing the same expression of professional neutrality she always maintained. But tonight he noticed the exhaustion beneath it, the fear, the weight. Anna, he said softly, could we talk? She stiffened immediately, eyes narrowing. About what? Your background, he replied. Your experience. The things you haven't told me. Her breath caught, her posture tightening like a defensive instinct. I don't know what you mean, she said, but her voice lacked its usual steadiness. Jonathan leaned forward, lowering his tone. I'm not here to hurt you. But there's something going on at Vertex, something that doesn't add up. And I think you know more about it than anyone else. Her throat tightened. She glanced around the dining room, ensuring no one was listening. You shouldn't get involved, she whispered. You have no idea what Daniel is capable of. Jonathan's expression hardened. That's exactly why I'm involved. He paused. Anna, did you work at Vertex? She didn't answer. Her silence was the answer. Her eyes filled with a quiet dread that confirmed everything he suspected. She wasn't just connected to Vertex, she was the missing piece. Jonathan straightened. If Daniel stole your work, I need to know the truth. I can't move forward with this merger until I understand what happened. Anna swallowed hard, torn between fear and the desire to finally be heard. Jonathan, she whispered, if you start digging into this, he will come after both of us. Jonathan didn't flinch. Let him try. For the first time in 2 years, someone wasn't telling her to run. Someone was telling her to stand. And that terrified her more than Daniel ever had. The morning of the confrontation arrived with a weight that settled deep in Anna's chest. She hadn't slept more than an hour. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's face, the calculating expression he wore when he lied to her, the way he justified betraying her, the cold confidence that made her realize she never truly knew him. Now she was about to face him again, not as the woman he destroyed, but as the woman who carried the truth he had buried. Jonathan arrived outside her apartment right at 8, his black sedan idling at the curb like an omen. He stepped out dressed in a charcoal suit, crisp and composed, radiating the authority she once watched from afar in business headlines. Yet when he looked at her, his expression softened. We will do this together, he said. His tone wasn't forceful, it was steady, grounding, and somehow gave her the courage to take the first step toward the car. During the drive to downtown Manhattan, neither of them spoke much, but the air between them buzzed with unspoken resolve. Jonathan reviewed documents on his tablet, metadata logs, patent anomalies, internal communications from Vertex's research team. Anna watched the city blur past the window, remembering all the times she had walked those same streets with ambition in her heart, never imagining she would one day return under such circumstances. The closer they got to Vertex's gleaming headquarters, the more her pulse climbed, but Jonathan placed a reassuring hand on the center console. Whatever happens today, he said, you're not alone. The lobby of Vertex Capital was as cold and polished as she remembered, white marble floors, towering glass walls, and a receptionist who recognized Jonathan immediately. Mr. Pierce, welcome, she said, her voice bright. Mr. Chu is expecting you. He's prepared the conference room on the executive floor. Anna caught the slight flicker of confusion in the receptionist's eyes as she glanced toward her. Daniel always insisted Anna's reputation be stained enough that no respectable corporate figure would associate with her. Seeing Anna walk in beside the CEO of Pierce Holdings was likely the last thing Daniel wanted. They rode the elevator to the 49th floor in tense quiet. Anna's hands tightened against her sides as they stepped into the long hallway lined with glass offices. Everything felt too familiar, the layout, the scent of polished wood, the distant hum of servers running deep analytics. Jonathan led her into the conference room, and there he was. Daniel Chu stood near the head of the table, his suit immaculate, his expression relaxed in a way that immediately made Anna wary. He had always been good at looking calm even when the world burned behind him. But when his eyes landed on her, the mask faltered for a split-second, shock, irritation, and calculation flashed in rapid succession before he regained control. Anna, he said slowly, I didn't expect to see you here. His voice held that same smooth confidence, but beneath it she heard something sore, fear. Jonathan stepped forward before she could respond. You didn't expect her, he said, because you didn't expect anyone to question the story you told. Daniel's jaw tightened. Story. He repeated, I run a transparent company, Jonathan. If she's filled your head with fantasies, I'm happy to clear things up. He offered a smile that made Anna's skin crawl. That smile had once charmed investors. It had once charmed her. Now she saw the poison behind it. Jonathan opened the folder he had brought. I don't need her to tell me anything, he said. Your own documents told me enough. He spread the printed pages across the table, metadata logs showing Anna's early involvement, timestamps inconsistent with Vertex's narrative, drafts referencing her original file naming conventions. Daniel's face hardened. These are internal working files, he said smoothly. Anyone could have. Don't lie, Anna cut in, her voice steady though her hands trembled. Those algorithms were mine. I wrote them. You deleted my name from every version. Daniel's eyes snapped back to her, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away. She was tired of shrinking, tired of letting him shape the narrative. Jonathan stepped slightly closer to her, an unspoken shield. Daniel's gaze flicked to him briefly before returning to her with a sharper edge. Anna, he said, tone lowering, you walked away. Don't pretend otherwise. She felt anger rise at the familiar manipulation. "I didn't walk away," she said. "You forced me out. You filed false accusations. You stole everything I built." The truth hung in the air like a crack of thunder. Jonathan watched Daniel closely, gauging every micro-expression. Daniel's confidence wavered for the first time. His posture stiffened, his fingers curling slightly at his sides. "This is absurd," he snapped. "She has no proof." Jonathan tapped the stack of documents. "I do, and my legal team found more." He paused. "This merger is suspended pending full investigation." Daniel's composure shattered. "You can't be serious," he said sharply. "You rebasing a $1 billion decision on the accusations of a woman who he cut himself off, but it was too late." Jonathan's eyes flashed with anger. "Careful," he warned. "Choose your next words wisely." Daniel swallowed the insult he was about to throw. He shifted tactics immediately. Classic Daniel, redirecting pressure instead of facing it. "Jonathan, she's manipulating you," he said. "She's been unstable since she left." "You don't know what she's told. Have you heard enough?" Jonathan said. Anna watched them, her heart pounding in her ribs. For the first time, someone powerful was standing between her and Daniel's lies. She felt something unfamiliar, vindication slowly rising through the fear. Daniel turned back to her with a sneer he no longer bothered to hide. "You think you're gonna ruin me?" he hissed. "You think anyone will believe you?" Anna stepped forward, her voice cold and clear. "They don't have to believe me," she said. "They only have to see the evidence." Jonathan folded his arms. "And they will. Every investor, every board member, every regulatory body." Daniel's face twisted with anger. He had always thrived in control, and now that control slipped through his fingers. "You're making a mistake," he growled. Jonathan didn't flinch. "No," he replied, "I'm correcting one." Security was called moments later, not to escort Anna out, but to escort Daniel away after he attempted to destroy the printed evidence on the table. Jonathan stepped protectively in front of Anna when Daniel lunged forward, and the guards restrained him as he shouted threats neither of them reacted to. Watching him drag down the hall, Anna felt her breath trembling out of her chest, not from fear but from release. She had walked into the building with years of weight pressing on her shoulders. She walked out knowing Daniel's empire was about to collapse. Jonathan didn't let go of her arm until they reached the elevator. His touch was steady, grounding. "It's over," he said quietly. "He won't be able to hurt you again." Anna's eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded, overwhelmed by something she had never expected to feel again: safety. And as the elevator doors closed, Jonathan made a silent promise to himself. He wasn't just going to stop the merger. He was going to make sure Anna got her life back. In the days following the confrontation at Vertex, the financial world erupted with the kind of noise that Anna had once been at the center of but never expected to face again. News outlets picked up rumors almost immediately. Analysts whispered about irregularities in Vertex's intellectual property claims. Members of the Pierce Holdings board demanded urgent explanations. Investors who once praised Daniel for his innovations now questioned every part of his narrative. Jonathan, calm as ever, stood before cameras and boardrooms with the steady confidence of someone who refused to let deception define the future of his company. But despite his composed facade, his focus never strayed far from Anna. He knew how easily public scrutiny could turn cruel, and he wasn't going to let her be caught in its trajectory. Anna had spent most of her time in Jonathan's private office at the headquarters of Pierce Holdings, working alongside legal teams and forensic analysts who needed her insight to understand the algorithms Daniel had claimed as his own. It was surreal. 1 month earlier, she'd been carrying plates through a restaurant, trying to survive unnoticed. Now she stood before experts who hung on her every word, watching them study her with respect she hadn't seen since before her world collapsed. It was validating, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. Every time she explained a section of code or an architectural decision, someone in the room would exchange surprised glances as though they couldn't believe a Waitress had created models capable of reshaping financial forecasting. She kept her hair tied back, wore plain clothes, and tried not to draw attention. But her presence alone was enough to shift the energy in every room she stepped into. She wished she could hide, but this time there was no hiding. If she wanted justice, she had to participate in uncovering the truth. Jonathan made sure she was never alone in those meetings. He introduced her properly. "This is Anna Reynolds, the original architect of Vertex's trading algorithms," and the simple act of saying her name in a room full of industry leaders nearly made her chest tighten with emotion. For 2 years, she had erased herself to survive. Now she was being acknowledged in a way she once believed she'd never experience again. Meanwhile, Daniel's downfall unfolded rapidly. Regulators launched formal investigations after Jonathan submitted the forensic evidence. Half of Vertex's board members resigned within a week. The remaining members attempted damage control, But the story had already broken too far. Journalists dug into patent histories, uncovering the discrepancies Jonathan's team revealed. Suddenly, headlines everywhere read questions surround Vertex algorithm origins, who really built Cho's breakthrough tech. And eventually, former employee identified as true creator of Vertex innovation. There was no stopping the truth now. Jonathan received countless calls, some from industry giants, others from furious investors demanding answers from Vertex. He handled the conversations with strategic poise, but every now and then, when he looked across his office at Anna quietly reviewing statements with the legal team, his expression softened. He admired her, not just her intelligence but her resilience. He had met powerful women all his life, CEOs, attorneys, economists, but Anna carried a different strength, one forged in betrayal and rebuilt through grit. And he couldn't help but feel protective of her, not because she was fragile, but because she had been forced to endure a pain no one deserved. The first court hearing approached faster than expected. Daniel had been arrested for fraud, intellectual property theft, and multiple regulatory violations. He was out on bail, but the case against him grew stronger every day. Still, the idea of facing him in court terrified Anna more than she wanted to admit. She hadn't forgotten the way he looked at her in the conference room, angered, cornered, calculating. Men like Daniel never accepted defeat easily. He would come after her reputation again if he had the chance. He would twist her words, try to discredit her, try to make her seem unstable to protect himself. That had been his tactic before. She feared it would be his tactic again. But Jonathan was prepared for that. He spent hours with his legal team ensuring that every piece of evidence was airtight. He gathered testimony from former Vertex employees who admitted they had never met Anna, but noticed their early prototypes referenced files authored under her initials. He hired private investigators who uncovered documents Daniel attempted to destroy. He even filed injunctions preventing Daniel from claiming credit for any version of the algorithms during the legal proceedings. Jonathan wasn't just uncovering the truth, he was building a fortress around Anna's name. He owed her that much. And he wanted her to see that someone believed in her now. Someone refused to let her stand alone against a man who had crushed her before. The night before the hearing, Anna sat on Jonathan's balcony overlooking the city, her hands wrapped around a warm mug as she stared at the skyline she once loved. She felt both stronger and more vulnerable than ever. Jonathan stepped outside quietly, standing beside her but giving her space. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. "My team can handle the majority of the testimony." She shook her head. "This is my work," she whispered, "my name, my life. If I don't speak now, then everything he took stays his forever." Jonathan nodded, understanding completely. "Then I'll be with you every step of the way." The next morning, as they entered the courthouse, reporters swarmed outside, cameras flashing. People shouted Daniel's name, Jonathan's name, and then unexpectedly Anna's. Hearing her name in public again shook her. But Jonathan placed a steady hand on her back, guiding her forward with calm assurance. Inside the courtroom, Daniel stood at the defense table looking far more strained than he ever let the media see. His eyes flicked toward Anna with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had spent 2 years convinced she was gone, professionally and socially erased. Seeing her walk in beside one of the most powerful CEOs in the country was a blow to his ego no headline could soften. The judge called the room to order, and the proceedings began. Vertex's board members were forced to testify, and the more they spoke, the more the cracks in Daniel's narrative widened. Jonathan's legal team presented the digital forensic analysis, exposing the tampering Daniel attempted to hide. Anna's patents resurfaced with irrefutable evidence that they belonged to her. When she finally took the stand, the room fell into an attentive hush. She explained her development process, her methodology, the architectural decisions behind her algorithms. She articulated everything Daniel had stolen with unwavering clarity. By the time she stepped down, there was no longer any question she was the true creator. Daniel's empire had collapsed. The merger died, and Anna's name began its rise back into the world it had been torn from. But Jonathan wasn't celebrating the victory. He was watching Anna, making sure she felt the weight lifting off her shoulders, making sure she knew she was finally free. 6 months after the trial, New York looked different to Anna, not because the city had changed, but because she finally had the freedom to look at it without fear. She walked through the bustling streets with her shoulders no longer tense, no longer expecting to hear Daniel's voice behind her or see his lawyers waiting outside her building. The courts had ruled decisively. Daniel Cho was convicted of fraud, intellectual property theft, obstruction of justice, and falsifying documents. The judge called his actions a deliberate campaign to erase and exploit a rival mind. Anna would never forget the moment the verdict was read. Daniel looked at her with the same arrogance he always carried. but beneath it was a flicker of dread he could no longer hide. He was escorted away minutes later, and Anna felt something inside her finally loosen, like a knot pulled tight for years had unraveled all at once. She wasn't Navesh. She knew scars didn't disappear the moment justice was served. But every day that passed felt a little lighter than the one before. Jonathan insisted she take time to rest, offering her access to private wellness retreats and therapy resources. But Anna chose to heal in her own way. She spent long days reading through old notebooks she had salvaged from her past life, the ones filled with scribbled equations, breakthrough moments, and ideas she once dreamed of expanding. For years, looking at those notebooks brought her nothing but pain. Now they sparked something she hadn't felt since before her world collapsed. Excitement. The spark soon grew into determination. She wanted to build again. Not rebuild the life she lost that was gone, and she didn't want to chase a ghost but create something new. Something that belonged entirely to her. With Jonathan's encouragement, she began drafting plans for a new company. She named it Reynolds Technologies, not out of vanity, but because she wanted her name back in the world on her own terms. Finding investors was easier than she expected. Once the truth about Daniel's deception spread, industry leaders were eager to support her. Some offered funding out of guilt for believing the worst about her years ago. Others were genuinely impressed by her brilliance and wanted to be part of whatever she created next. But Anna stayed selective. She didn't want to build an empire based on opportunists. She wanted integrity, transparency, innovation. And she wanted freedom to do things the way she believed they should be done. Jonathan provided guidance, not interference. He made sure she had access to the best legal advisors, accountants, and security consultants, but he never tried to control her decisions. He insisted on only one thing: your vision leads, the rest of us follow. Their relationship had transformed quietly during the months after the trial. There was no grand confession, no dramatic moment. Instead, affection grew in the spaces between shared work sessions, late-night conversations, and the unspoken understanding that they trusted each other in a way neither had trusted anyone in a long time. When Anna struggled with the pressure of re-entering the tech world, Jonathan stayed by her side. When Jonathan faced criticism for suspending the merger, Anna reminded him that integrity wasn't something you measured in stocks. They balanced each other, challenged each other, encouraged each other. Jonathan respected her boundaries, never pushing her faster than she wanted to move. While Anna learned how to accept help without feeling like she was losing herself. Reynolds Technologies officially launched on a crisp fall morning, and the press covered it with enthusiasm. Articles hailed Anna as a reborn innovator and the true mind behind Vertex's former successes. She was invited to speak at conferences, interviewed by major networks, and offered positions at universities. Jonathan attended the launch event, though he stayed in the background, not wanting to overshadow her moment. When it was over, he found her standing near a window overlooking the city, her expression filled with something between awe and disbelief. "You did this," he said. She shook her head with a quiet smile. "We did this," but Jonathan gently corrected her. "No, this is yours." As her company grew, so did her confidence. She hired a small team: programmers, mathematicians, analysts, people who believed in ethical innovation rather than cutthroat ambition. Together they began developing tools that improved financial transparency, designed to prevent exactly the kind of manipulation Daniel had thrived on. It was poetic in a way. She took the damage he caused and forged it into a mission to keep it from happening to others. Every project they launch, every client who embraced their tools was another step toward rewriting her legacy. Her personal life flourished too. She and Jonathan grew closer, though neither rushed into labels or declarations. Their connection didn't need theatrics. It was built on trust and shared battles, on the comfort of sitting beside someone who understood the weight of responsibility. Jonathan introduced her to his mother again, this time in a more personal setting, and Eleanor welcomed her with open arms, literally. She signed rapidly with excitement, telling Anna how proud she was, how brave she had been, how grateful she felt that her son had met someone so genuine. Anna felt warmth rise in her chest she hadn't expected. She signed back with ease, feeling like she belonged somewhere for the first time in years. One evening, about 2 months after Reynolds Technologies launched, Jonathan invited her to his penthouse for dinner. It wasn't a business meeting, wasn't a strategy discussion, just the two of them. They cooked together well. Jonathan attempted to cook, while Anna laughed at his inability to chop vegetables properly. Afterward, they sat on his balcony watching the skyline glow against the night. Jonathan leaned back, hands in his pockets, and looked at her with a softness she had never seen in him before. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. "I'm glad you found your way back." Anna's throat tightened. "I'm glad you found me," she admitted, The moment felt simple yet profound. They weren't defined by battles anymore. They weren't defined by Daniel. They were defined by choice, by choosing each other. As winter approached, Reynolds Technologies secured its first major partnership, a financial firm committed to ethical management. Jonathan celebrated with her quietly away from reporters, telling her he always knew she would rebuild something extraordinary. Anna didn't feel extraordinary. She felt grounded, alive, and finally aligned with the person she once dreamed of becoming. She no longer carried fear like armor, she carried purpose. There were still days when memories surfaced, when the past reminded her of everything she lost. But now, she also had reminders of everything she gained: freedom, redemption, and a future she could shape without interference. Jonathan stood by her side not because she needed protection but because he wanted to stand there. And she let him, not because she needed saving but because trust was something she could give again. Anna Reynolds had once been erased. Now she was building a name no one would ever steal again. And with Jonathan at her side, she stepped into the future with a heart no longer bracing for impact but ready for everything waiting ahead. The story of Anna Reynolds is at its core a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the extraordinary strength people can find when everything they once depended on collapses. Her journey teaches that even when one's world is destroyed by betrayal, manipulation, or injustice, the path forward is not defined by the fall itself but by the choice to rise again. Anna's life was derailed by someone she trusted more than anyone. Someone who used her brilliance as a foundation for his own success while discarding her without remorse. The pain of such betrayal doesn't simply fade if it alters the way a person sees themselves and the world. Yet Anna's story shows that even after profound devastation, recovery is possible. Healing is not quick and it is not easy, but it begins the moment a person decides they deserve better than the circumstances forced upon them. Her struggle reveals that identity cannot truly be stolen. It can be suppressed, hidden, or distorted by lies, but the truth has a way of resurfacing when courage meets opportunity. Another powerful lesson woven through the narrative is the importance of integrity and how it distinguishes genuine leaders from those who thrive on manipulation. Daniel Chu built his empire on deception, erasing Anna's role, falsifying documents, and constructing an image of brilliance that never belongs to him. His downfall demonstrates that success gained through unethical means is inherently fragile. It may hold for a moment, even for years, but eventually it collapses beneath the weight of its own dishonesty. In contrast, Jonathan Pierce represents another side of leadership, one rooted in responsibility, fairness, and the willingness to question even the most convenient truths. He had every incentive to move forward with the merger that promised enormous wealth and prestige. Yet when he discovered inconsistencies, he chose truth over profit, people over appearances, and justice over convenience. His choices illustrate that integrity is not merely a virtue. It is a source of power, one that can rewrite outcomes, protect the vulnerable, and reshape the future in a way that wealth alone never could. Anna's journey also highlights the transformative nature of being seen, truly seen, by someone who recognizes one's worth beyond the surface. For years, Anna lived in the shadows, convinced that disappearing was the only way to survive. The world she once belonged to had framed her as the villain in her own story, leaving her convinced that no one would ever believe her truth. When Jonathan looked at her and saw not a disgraced engineer but a woman with a sharp mind and untold depth, he offered something she had been denied for far too long: validation. Not the kind that inflates ego, but the kind that restores a person's sense of identity and dignity. His belief in her didn't heal her instantly, but it reminded her that her voice mattered, that her work mattered, that she herself mattered. The lesson here is profound. One person's recognition can illuminate the parts of us we thought the darkness had swallowed forever. Sometimes it takes the right person asking the right questions to remind us of who we truly are. The story further teaches that while trauma can shape a person, it does not have to define their destiny. Anna carried her past like a weight, every fear, every doubt, every memory of betrayal shaping how she moved through the world. But when the truth came to light, she discovered that her future was not contingent on what had been taken from her, but on what she chose to rebuild. Starting Reynolds Technologies wasn't just about reclaiming her career, it was about reclaiming her identity and rewriting her narrative on her own terms. She turned her pain into purpose, creating innovations designed to prevent the very kind of exploitation she experienced. This transformation illustrates that trauma, while deeply impactful, can become a foundation for strength, insight, and empowerment. Pain can break someone, but it can also sharpen them, teaching them compassion, clarity, and a vision they might not have possessed otherwise. Finally, the story teaches that justice is not only about punishing wrongdoing, it is about restoring balance, dignity, and truth. When Daniel was convicted, it wasn't simply a victory for Anna, it was a validation of everything she had endured alone. It was the world acknowledging the truth she had carried silently for years. Justice, in this context, served as both a reckoning and a rebirth. It reminded her and anyone watching that lies may shape the world temporarily, but truth remains undefeated when it is finally given the chance to be heard. Jonathan's role in securing that justice further underscores the lesson that allies matter. Support matters. People who stand with us in our battles can change the course of our lives. The right partnership rooted in trust, respect, and shared courage can be transformative, both personally and professionally. When seen as a whole, the story is a powerful reminder that life can fracture us, betray us, and challenge us in ways we never imagined. But it also shows that rebuilding is possible, that truth has endurance, that strength can reemerge from devastation, and that love, whether romantic, familial, or found through unexpected friendships, can help repair what was once broken. Anna's arc is more than a tale of survival. It is a declaration that no matter how thoroughly someone attempts to erase your name, your worth remains intact. No matter how deeply you are wronged, you can reclaim your place. And no matter how dark the past may be, the future remains unwritten, waiting for the moment you choose to step into it with courage, clarity, and determination.
If you find this video helpful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss upcoming videos. If you have any suggestions or questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd really love to hear your feedback. Thank you for watching until the end.